Hello everybody. Today we're going to be having a look at how to make Psytrance bass. So firstly, there is an unlimited number of different ways of making Psytrance bass, and there are so many different good ways of doing it that all sound great and all sound different. So there's that. But today we're going to be looking at how to make a bass that sounds like this. Okay, so we've got quite a short processing chain on this as well. Just Saturn, 2 EQs, and Saturn again. Oh, and then LFO tool to just chop the end off. Okay, so not a crazy processing chain or anything, just quite a short, simple one, because the really long processing chains are somewhat more difficult to show off in a tutorial, so we're just going to go with this for now. So first thing you're going to need is a blank channel. And let's mute the old one. Now let's draw ourselves some MIDI notes. I'm going to go with G sharp because I like G sharp. And for the moment, I'm just going to set these last two to full velocity and this first one to as low velocity as possible. Okay, so now, firstly, I'm going to put two MIDI effects on it. I'm going to have a note length and a velocity. So what this is going to allow us to do is control the length of the note, and with this out low here, we're going to be able to control the groove, because all that will affect is our lowest velocity note, so the first note of the three. So let's leave that all the way down for the moment, and let's get Serum. So you can use whatever synth you want, but I find that I have the best results with Serum. For a long time I disliked Serum for bass, but eventually I came around to it. So I am not a huge fan of the init saw. So what I prefer to do is go into the editor and right click in the bins and phases, right click and go generate saw. Generate saw. Okay, so now we have a slightly weird looking saw wave. It is actually a saw wave, it's just that some of the phases are a bit different how you might expect, so you get this different shape. Okay, and now we're going to go over to process and flip vertical, flip horizontal. So now we have a slightly different saw wave. Okay, so now I'm going to turn the random all the way down, and I'm going to set the phase up near the end somewhere. For the moment, I'll just leave it there. We can work that out in a moment. Okay, so firstly, let's set the attack of our amp envelope. So what I like to do is just push the attack up a whole load, and then I make our first curve really as aggressively like this as I can. So, and now I set it to about 0.9 milliseconds. So if you're going to use lots and lots of different notes, then I really suggest that you leave your attack down at 0, because that way you will have the same transient sound every single time. But right now, I don't want to use lots of notes, so I'm just going to go with 0.9 because I find that that gives me the most snap. Okay, so now I'll set my decay to about 100 milliseconds or so. And I'll probably go with a sustain of about -1. And then it's important that we pull this down so we get a nice exponential curve. You don't want it completely all the way down, but you can pull it down and then just push up a tiny bit. Yeah, something like that. Don't worry too much about this, because there's a whole number of different things we can do to change this later on. Okay, so let's sort out our filter envelope. So I'm going to set this up the same way in terms of the attack as I did with the amp envelope. Let's set this to 0.9 milliseconds. And let's go over to the filter section, turn on our filter, and go for a MG low 18. So I really like these 18 decibel per octave filters. They're really cool, and I don't really find them in many other synths. But yeah, I really like the sound they have, but also sometimes I'll use a 12, 18, or a 24. It just depends completely on the style of bass that I'm going for. Okay, so let's set the cutoff all the way to the bottom, resonance all the way to the bottom, and leave the rest alone. Okay, now let's set our envelope on the cutoff and have it go all the way up, and it'll do that by itself if you've set the cutoff to the bottom already. So we've got full range of modulation happening here, which is exactly what I'm after. And then I'm gonna go on the decay, and I'm gonna set it around 300 or so milliseconds. Okay, and now I'm going to pull the sustain down. I'm going to pull it right to the bottom to start with. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull down our curve. And we want to get a nice exponential curve going on. So what I often do is pull it down until it hits the bottom, about there. And then I pull it back up when it sort of covers up most of our number here, but just leaves the top of the number still there. Okay, and then let's set our sustain, about 60% or so. With these decay and sustain values, it's really completely up to your taste, but I do recommend you use quite an exponential curve, regardless of what decay and sustain you're going to use. Okay, so let's see what we've got. Well, firstly, we need to go down an octave. Doesn't sound too bad, but it could be a little bit tighter. Let's turn the decay down. That sounds good to me. Okay, so let's get the groove into it as well. So let's turn our level down to about halfway and check the velocity modulator on it. Okay, so I'm just going to pop over to the mixer and get this hitting about -12. Sounds good. So now, what I often like to do is just turn on the filter on MG low 6, just set it as high as it will go, no resonance or anything like that, and full mix. And all this is doing is just pulling off the very highest frequencies from our bass. So the difference is quite subtle, but I feel like by taking away some of the very highest frequencies, it gives a bit more emphasis to the sort of high mids where the real snap is going on. Okay, so now that we've got what sounds something like a Psytrance bass, let's just do some finishing touches to it. So let's get this phase position just right. I like it about there. And now let's sort out the release times here. So I'm going to go with about 20 milliseconds because that is almost always seems to work for me for these amp envelopes on bass. And I'm going to go for nearly linear and then just down a little bit. And I'm going to go over to my filter envelope, and I'm going to set my release on this to be about 5 milliseconds longer than my amp release. Okay, that sounds about right to me. Let's just pull down the gate on our note and see if the release is sounding good or not. So often I go with about 80%. It's a little bit too short in this case. Let's turn it up a couple. Okay, just needed literally 2% more just to hum through a little bit more. Okay, so I tend to turn the quality up as well. It doesn't make a massive difference, but I'll do it anyway. And now what I'll do is just match it to -12. Okay, so if we wanted, we could play with the groove now. But I'm going to leave it down because I want that more sort of pumping type of feeling. Okay, so let's get Saturn. I like to use Saturn 2, mainly because we can control the steepness of our crossovers. So for the moment, let's turn this drive all the way down and turn our mix up to about 30%. But what's really interesting with Saturn 2, I'm not so sure about the first one, I haven't tried this yet in it, but we can actually turn the mix all the way down and our crossovers still take effect. Which is quite interesting. So if I grab an oscilloscope, just so you can see what's going on, make it a bit bigger for you as well. When we change the mix, it affects the way our crossover affects the sound. So let's pull this up so we won't get any obvious change. And let's just put our mix to 100%. So as you can hear and see, our crossover makes quite a big difference to the waveform. So if I leave it to play and change the mix, you'll see that the crossover effect is still happening. So the dispersion is still being caused, but it's a bit different. So, like I said, I tend to find it works best around 30%. This way we don't get too much of a spike in volume after the transient, and to me it just seems to sound almost always around this area, more consistent to me. Okay, so let's get this crossover just right. And let's even try a more aggressive crossover. Let's go for a 48 decibel. So that sounds good to me. Let's just sweep it around and see if we can find anywhere better. I really quite like what it does to the mids when it's about here. So we've gone with about 204 Hertz. Okay, so, and then, I'm not sure why the band level's up. Let's just turn that to 0. Make sure our driver's down. Cool. So then I tend to put another crossover around about 1000 Hertz because it often can kind of prevent any large peaks in volume. So let's have a look at what we've got right now. So if we look at the transient of our bass, you can see it's quite aggressive, quite loud seeming. So what we can do is add our crossover, and let's put it around 1000, sweep it around and see where we like it best. Okay, and let's just use an A/B to see the difference. And to me, the transient sounds a lot more ballsy and interesting. Okay, so that will do for now with Saturn. And let's just quickly see, well, let's first match the volume. Okay, so let's see what it was like before Saturn. And then with Saturn. So it's a lot more sort of powerful seeming and a lot more transient energy going on, sort of more Psytrance bassy. Okay, so the issue though that we've caused is it's a bit too upfront in the mids. So the next thing we're going to do is use some EQ. So you can use whatever EQ you like. I like Pro Q3. I like a lot of EQs actually, but for this time we're just going to use Pro Q3. Alright, so let's do some EQ. Usually around about D4 area in this sort of 300 or so Hertz area. There's almost always something that nags my ear, so let's have a listen and see what I can get rid of. Okay, so here what we're trying to do is we're trying to take this harmonic down a little bit, but we don't want to just take this harmonic down because it might be the only one that obviously sticks out to us right now, but actually if we were to take it down on its own, it's going to make the other harmonics around it sound weird. And also, the tighter we go with our EQ, the more ringing we're going to bring in, and we'll just cause more trouble than we can fix with this. So I'm going to go for around 2.8 looks about right. Let's have a listen to it. Nice. Okay, so now as you do your EQ, you're going to find that pulling one harmonic down makes other harmonics seem more powerful, so you need to try to be careful not to do too much work because you're going to go chasing your tail for ages otherwise. So I'm not going to go crazy on the EQ here because this will be a very long video. So I'm just going to go for the things that stick out most to me and the things that I think are probably the most important. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so let's have a listen. I quite like my basses not to have too much of this lowish mid stuff going on. It really depends on the key, BPM, style, whatever. But I'm just going to go with what sounds good to me right now. Okay, so some people like to have this first fifth in their bass. I sometimes do like it. I tend to prefer to have it in lower bassline tracks, especially forest type stuff. Don't really have much fundamental at all, and I'll leave a nice bit of that first fifth so you actually get that sort of chest pounding bass even though it's a really low bass. Okay, so that's about right. Let's carry on. Okay, so here I often like to use shelves on the very highest and very lowest parts of the bass because shelves don't really affect phase as much as, say, a low cut or something, so I just like to use those. Okay, so let's match the volume again. Okay, also I think we need to pull out a bit of this 800, 900 hertz stuff. It just sounds horrible. Let's take some of it out. this stuff. Really horrible nasal things. So that is kind of subtle, but it just makes a massive difference to the bass. For me at least, it just stops it from sounding so two-dimensional and kind of boxy. So let's take another Pro Q, and there's no reason to actually take another Pro Q. I only do this because I can just sort of see what I'm doing a bit better. It's really no point in doing it, but I just work like that. So now, well, firstly, let's just check the volume is matched to -12. Yeah, -12. Alright, so let's have a listen. Okay, so again, let's just make sure it's gain matched. So it's fairly subtle, only 1.4 dB here, but we've gained 0.4 dB in headroom, and it just really clears up our bass. Okay, so let's check before our processing and after, just to make sure we're going in the right direction. Much better. Okay, so you might like to leave your bass like this now. It depends whereabouts you are in making your track and what type of track you have. So from what I can hear, I'm on headphones at the moment, so it does make it slightly harder to make a bass. I do recommend to all of you, make your bass on speakers. It does just make life a bit easier. I do of course check it on headphones, but I do think that speakers make it easier. So if you have a track that has plenty of space in the mids, then go for it, leave it like this, because this is really quite mid-heavy bass from what I can hear here. Nice sort of timbre to it. But if you wanted to go a little bit further, we could take duplicate of our Saturn, chuck it at the end of the chain, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to set the mix to 100%, and for the moment let's just put the output to 0 to make lives easier. Okay, so these mids that I said were perhaps a little bit too aggressive, let's have a listen to those. Okay, what I want to do is make these a bit quieter, but I don't just want to make them quieter, I want to give them some character at the same time. So I'm going to push the drive up. Okay, so I pushed it up to the point where I sort of start to hear it driving. A bit of grit. Again, this is something I tend to find a bit easier on speakers. But anyway, I'll stop making excuses. And now let's pull down the band level. Okay, and now let's gain match it again. Okay, and let's just check what we had, what I showed off in the beginning, and just see if they're even remotely similar. So it's pretty close. But yeah, that is a simple processing, fairly minimal processing for a bass. So after that, I'll chuck an LFO tool, because as we can see, the beginning of our kick is getting smeared. We don't want that, so let's make our screen a little bit bigger, and let's pull out the very beginning. Okay, so it's not perfect, but that's good enough for me. And then going forwards, we can add things like more saturation, things like a disperser, various weird transient effects and things like that if you like. But this for me is a nice basis for your bass. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're on my level 2 Patreon or above, you can download this channel strip. And if you haven't already, please come and join my Discord channel in the link beneath. And otherwise, have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time.